As I was introduced, I am coming to you guys live from Meursault in the Burgundy wine region. So it's about 15 minutes from where I actually live in Beaune. It's nighttime here, but I'm happy to be with you guys in the daylight. It's kind of inspiring and, wakes me up. So I've been here for over a year and a half. I work at a local cheese shop where I sell cheese. I advise on wines and do some of the ordering for some of the spices and other products we have in the store. It's been really fun to kind of embrace my French heritage, live in France, experience life as a French person. Even though the last year has been a bit challenging, I've still been able to kind of see what life is all about here, learn more about cheese, and visit some suppliers to help me eventually, as Janine mentioned, launch an export company where I can hopefully try to bring these good cheeses back to the States where you all can try them, learn more about old world cheeses, and kind of just foster excitement and new experiences with cheese. So that being said, for those of you who haven't joined us before for one of these cheese and wine pairings, I typically start by talking about the producer of the cheese, going into the make of the cheese, and then kind of talking about why we chose the cheese, and then we get to eat it and pair it with the wine, where my father will then talk about the wine. And we love your questions, so any questions are welcome about cheese, about wine, about Burgundy. We love to hear it. So that being said, we'll get into our first pairing, which is the Meadow Creek Dairy Mountaineer cheese. So for those of you who don't know, Meadow Creek Dairy is actually in Virginia. It's in Galax, Virginia, which is in the southern part of the state, near North Carolina, right on the border there, and in a pretty mountainous area. So that lends itself to having Alpine style cheeses, and the cheesemakers there were inspired by trips to France, to Italy, to the mountainous regions. So when they made this cheese, they were really inspired by cheeses like Beaufort, Abondance, and maybe something you've heard of called Comté. So really rich, nutty, earthy cheeses. And at this farm, they have 3 different breeds of cows they've kind of pulled together to make a really nice herd where they have really rich flavors. And the cows are grazed in the mountains where they have access to wildflowers, really great grass, and all that plays into today. So the Mountaineer cheese is Alpine style. It's cooked pressed. So for those of you who don't know what that is, it means that the curds are then reheated once they've formed to create less acidity, which allows for longer aging. So this style cheese is going to be aged from 6 to 9 months. And then some of the big Alpine wheels are aged up to 48 months, so 4 years. So basically the way they're produced allows them to have that long-term aging to get really rich, complex, and nutty flavors that really pair well with the wine we're going to taste today, that pair well with food. They're great cooking cheeses. You can keep them in your fridge for a long time. They're very sturdy and very fun to eat. So I invite you to take a look at your cheese. For those of you who have the cheeses, hopefully you're able to get the Mountaineer or something similar. It should be pretty golden in color. That's evidence of what the cows have been eating. Beta carotene present in like the wildflowers and the grasses. If you take a look at it, it should be a pretty smooth and even paste. Maybe you have some little white spots, which would be protein crystals. Maybe it has some holes, which would be a little bit of carbon dioxide called eyes left in the cheese during the production process. So I invite you all to take a sniff, to take a taste. And you should be tasting a lot of grassiness, earthiness, and a little bit of nuts, a little bit of nuttiness. So the reason we selected this cheese to pair with the 2016 Chardonnay is because of that nuttiness, the earthiness, which we hoped would bring out pear notes in the wine, some hazelnut, and then overall the rich butteriness would kind of balance the oakiness in the Chardonnay and create a really nice harmony. And the harmony is what we're trying to do with pairing wine and cheese. We're looking to create, a nice balance where one product doesn't overshine or overshadow the other. So if we're able to have you taste both products together and, one doesn't hide the other, then we've done a good job. So with that being said, I invite you to taste the cheese, and I'll turn it back over to my father, who will discuss the wine as we kind of nibble on this cheese.
Anna, you described the wine perfectly. I don't know there's much I can say after that. No, the wine this is just I thought it was a perfect match when we did when Hannah recommended this cheese with the Chardonnay. I tasted it, and like she said, the nuttiness and the earthiness really matched nicely with the Chardonnay. The Chardonnay is a 2016 Chardonnay. Which is our current vintage of Chardonnay. And if you know anything about the history of Chardonnay in Burgundy, where we make Chardonnay, that's where Chardonnay is the most well-known and the most famous. And the Chardonnays there are higher in acidity than, say, your New World Chardonnays in general, and are made more for aging, for longer term aging. more like a red wine than a traditional white wine. Everyone here in the U.S. really drinks young Chardonnay, only a year or two old. But classic white Burgundy Chardonnay is aged anywhere from 5 to 10 years if it's a good vintage from a good site. And this vineyard that I found in 2007 is in just outside of Leesburg in Percival. And up until 2007, I never had a Chardonnay under my label because I couldn't find a vineyard that satisfied the quality and the style that I wanted to produce. The Chardonnay that's grown here in Charlottesville is very nice, but it's a very hot region for Chardonnay. Chardonnay is a cool climate grape and needs a little bit cooler ripening, because what happens at the heat of ripening in September is the acids drop out of the grape and you get a softer kind of flat Chardonnay that a lot of winemakers have to add acid to kind of perk it up and make it more balanced. But I discovered the Wild Meadow Vineyard is what it's called. We have you can see on the label, the name of the single vineyard, Wild Meadow Vineyard. In 2007, a retired couple planted 5 acres of Chardonnay, and they were looking for a home for the grapes. And I went up there to see them and just fell in love with the site. It was much different soils than we have here, lighter limestone, loam soils that are different than our heavy clay in Charlottesville, and much more suitable for Chardonnay, and very similar to what we have in Burgundy. And so then on top of that, it was a really nice elevated site that had great southeast exposure, which allows full ripening, with the hill allowing for airflow and drainage, water drainage, wind drainage. And in 2007, I made the first trial with this vineyard and just fell in love with it. It was definitely, as we say, a wine that made itself in the vineyard. Came in with just beautiful chemistry, beautiful acidity and ripeness. And ever since 2007, I've been making this Chardonnay. And then eventually the family sold the property. We had one of our partners here who lived down the road actually buy the property and then leased it to us. So we're still managing it and growing the grapes and I'm making the wine with it. So I've been making this wine. So this would be basically the 9th vintage of the Chardonnay from Wild Meadow. And I make it the exact same way I make my Meursault and my white Burgundies, which is barrel fermented. The juice is put into barrels for fermentation. And it's a process which I use, I don't add any yeast to it. So it's a natural fermentation process like we do in France, the old world method, where we just let it slowly ferment on its own with the ambient yeast. And that's a very slow transition from juice to wine. And what that does is allow the natural fruit and aromatic esters to retain themselves in the wine without going through a very hot, fast fermentation that happens with commercial yeast strains. So it's a very slow process, sometimes doesn't even finish till the spring. And it's a little bit of a risky process because you're not sure if it's ever going to finish. But the result is a very complex, very fresh and vibrant style of Chardonnay. And the Wild Meadow is aged in 50% brand new oak for about a year. This is aged for about a year in barrels, and 50% of it's new. And it goes through a secondary fermentation, a malolactic fermentation, which softens the wine as well. And so now this is a 2016, so it's had some bottle age, and it's really starting to come in its own right now. It's really the perfect time to be drinking this wine. And if you've had a chance to try it, I think what you'll find is, as Hannah said, you get some of the pear notes and then more of a baked apple characteristic. I also find a little bit of a almost like a spice note that you might find in a spice bread cake. Sorry, and the oak is still there, the 50% oak, but it's really integrated into the wine where you get a little smokiness, a little vanilla, some butterscotch notes. But then when you taste the wine, you start to pick up some of that nuttiness that Hannah's talking about. Almost a hazelnut characteristic, more pear notes as well. And then the texture from the barrel and also from the lees, the sediment in the bottom of the barrel that we age it on, gives you a little more texture in the wine and a nice length and a full palate. And the sun's coming down right in my eyes. So it's full bodied, round, and if you taste it with the cheese, I think you could really pick up some of that earthiness, how the earthiness and acidity in the cheese really blends and pairs nicely with the Chardonnay. For me, the white wines that we make, both here in Virginia and in France, are really important to have good acidity, good natural acidity, which helps fill in the, broaden the palate and makes it more food friendly, most importantly. And when you're pairing it with cheeses, you really need to have the good acidity. And I think this pairing really shows the balance of acidity between the cheese, the wine, and then you pick up some of the earthy notes and nuttiness in both the cheese and wine that blend very nice. So Hannah, thoughts on that?
I mean, you said, we kind of are on the same page. I invite everyone, if they haven't, to eat and drink, taste together. And I think that's entirely, true about the flavors realize the flavors that come out. And it's important, I think, to mention that this is kind of a riff on a very classic pairing of Comte cheese and Old World Burgundy Chardonnay. So for those of you who don't know, Comte is what I mentioned, is an old style Alpine cheese, one of the very important cheeses of France. And it's actually produced only about an hour and a half away from here. So the old adage is what grows together goes together. So Comte is typically paired with Burgundy wines. Here we've taken an Old World style New World wine and an Old World style New World cheese. We put them together, and hopefully what you guys are tasting is a really nice balance where, as I mentioned before, one product isn't hiding the other, but really they're bringing out nice new flavors, hints of pear, hints of baked apple, and kind of just complementing each other. So if Janine's okay with it, we can open the floor to questions, comments, reactions. We're always happy to hear your thoughts, hear what you think, and any questions or comments you may have about the pairing, about your questions to us.
Thank you so much, Hannah and Michael. Wonderful pairing, really great choice. We did have a question in the chat about whether or not climate change was going to affect viniculture in Virginia, when Michael was talking about the Chardonnay being a cooler grape. So maybe we could start off with that quick question and then move to more specific questions.
Sure. The uniqueness of this site, and first, as I said, it's a little bit, I started to talk about the Chardonnay difference between Charlottesville and up in Percival. The 2-hour difference in distance by car also is a big difference in ripening. And what I meant to say is that this Chardonnay grapes grown there ripens about 2 weeks later than the Chardonnay grown here around Charlottesville, because the difference is a little bit cooler climate there. And it's really important. This traditionally was always picked towards the end of September, similar to what in Burgundy, we used to start harvest around the 3rd week in September. And that's when this was originally picked, when I first started making it. And now it's getting earlier and earlier, where we're picking these grapes probably about a week earlier than I did, back 10 years ago. And it's been pretty steady trend. I haven't seen a huge, besides, I mean, it varies some vintages because of rain and other conditions, it might be a later harvest, but what I haven't seen too much of in terms of the heat effect on with climate change on the Chardonnay, but what I have seen more of is the intensity of the rainfall and the storms that have affected us in the late season, which has changed. We've had some great vintages lately, so besides 2018, but when we have storms, they seem to be more violent and more intense, and that's been, I think, a part of the effect. But we haven't really seen major change, though we are picking earlier, but it hasn't been dramatic as it is in Burgundy, where we used to start the 3rd week in September. And I can't tell you the last time, going back probably to 2014 was the last time we started picking that late. This past year, I was done with harvest in Burgundy and back in Virginia on September 6th. And normally I wouldn't even start harvest in Burgundy till the 20th. And the past 4 out of 5 years have been 1st week of September harvesting instead of the 3rd week. So I've seen more of a change in Burgundy for sure than we have in Virginia, but there are some changes. So other questions?